A woman was reported missing somewhere between Nassau and Miami. Her name was Jessica Lawson, 34 years old, a wife, a mother, and a passenger who'd vanished without a trace. Her husband told the crew she must have fallen. Some believed him, others didn't. The ship kept moving, but the questions followed. Questions about that night, that cabin, and the choices that led two people onto a ship, when only one would return.
5:30, we're north of the Alloway, please first rate, Rockford,
July 1st, 2023, Denver, Colorado. On social media, they looked flawless. Jessica Lawson posted photos of weekend barbecues, family park days, and smiling snapshots from mountain hikes. Her husband Ethan stood proudly beside her, always with that effortless grin, the image of stability. Their neighbors described them as the couple everyone wanted to be. They had a modest home in the suburbs, 2 children, and a marriage that seemed unshakable. But behind those closed doors, the silence between them had grown louder than any argument. Ethan was once a successful real estate investor, known for flipping homes during Denver's post-pandemic boom. But by late 2022, everything started to crumble. Interest rates spiked, investors pulled out, and his properties sat empty. Within months, the empire he'd built on leverage collapsed. Jessica began noticing the change. The unopened mail stacked on the counter, the way Ethan's phone never left his pocket, and the quiet dinners where neither of them could find words that didn't sound forced. By March 2023, Jessica found a stack of envelopes marked Internal Revenue Service tucked in a kitchen drawer. She confronted him. He brushed it off. "Just business stuff," he said. But the truth was heavier. Their house had been secretly refinanced, and Ethan was drowning in more than $400,000 of personal debt. Friends later said Jessica tried to keep the family together. She once told a close friend, "I don't want my kids to grow up thinking love disappears when money does." When Ethan's birthday came around that May, Jessica surprised him with tickets for a 7-day Caribbean cruise. She told friends it was a reset button. What she didn't say was that she'd paid for it using her savings, the money she'd set aside for emergencies. "Maybe," she wrote in a message to her sister, "being away from everything will remind us why we started." June 30th, 2023, they boarded their flight to Florida. Witnesses recalled them holding hands at the terminal, but those who sat near them described something else, the kind of silence that comes from two people pretending they're fine. One flight attendant remembered Jessica staring out the window most of the flight, occasionally glancing at her phone, while Ethan scrolled through sports scores. July 9th, 2023, boarding day at Port Miami. The couple joined hundreds of passengers under the blazing sun, luggage rolling, cameras flashing. The serenity of the seas shimmered in the water, a floating city promising luxury, laughter, and distraction. To strangers, the Lawsons blended right in, another couple chasing vacation smiles. But inside their cabin, cracks began to widen. Jessica spent long hours reading on the balcony, while Ethan frequented the bar on deck 8. Staff later remembered seeing them pass each other without a word. Dinner on day 2 was tense. The maitre d' recalled Jessica quietly pushing her plate aside, saying she wasn't hungry. "Everything okay?" the waiter asked. Ethan smiled, squeezing her hand. "She's fine," he replied, too quickly. Jessica nodded, but her eyes told another story. Later that evening, a passenger who shared the elevator with them said Jessica looked upset. She reportedly muttered, "I can't keep doing this," while Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the floor numbers. Back home, friends noticed her absence from the group chat. One text she sent before the trip read, "If this doesn't fix things, I'll know where I stand." July 13th, 2023, the 4th night of the cruise. The ship drifted quietly between Nassau and Miami. The sunset party had ended hours earlier. Most passengers were asleep. Surveillance footage shows Ethan and Jessica walking the corridor toward their cabin just before midnight. He was holding his keycard. She followed a few steps behind, head down, arms folded. At exactly 11:48 p.m., the door to cabin 9274 opened and closed. What happened inside that room remains one of the greatest mysteries of the investigation. But in that moment, no alarms were raised. The sea stayed calm, the night uneventful. The following morning, however, one cabin attendant knocked on their door for routine service. No answer. The curtains fluttered, but only one deck chair was pulled out. Investigators later pieced together the fragments of that final day. How Jessica had visited the onboard spa at 5 p.m., tipping the attendant extra and mentioning it was her favorite place on the ship. How Ethan had spent nearly 2 hours in the casino after dinner, leaving the table with a drink and a glance at his watch. How their final photograph, taken by the ship's photographer at 10:43 p.m., showed Jessica smiling faintly while Ethan's hand rested on her shoulder, his expression unreadable. Those who met them on the cruise now recall the same feeling, something quiet and offbeat about the way they moved around each other. You could tell they were together, one passenger said, but it didn't feel like love. The most haunting part is that Jessica had no idea her story was about to end that night. The captain's log shows nothing unusual until the following morning. The sea was smooth, the weather calm, and there were no incidents reported overnight. Yet, by dawn, a wife, a mother, and a friend was gone, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a husband whose version of events would soon be challenged at every turn. At 11:48 p.m., cameras captured Ethan and Jessica Lawson returning to their cabin together. It would be the last time anyone ever saw Jessica Lawson alive. Before we continue, if you believe every detail matters in uncovering the truth, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this story. Because what investigators would soon find on that ship would change everything. Jessica Lawson was the kind of woman people described as gentle but determined. She wasn't loud, and she wasn't someone who quit easily. She believed in fixing what was broken, even when it meant carrying more than her share of the weight. Friends said she was the type to see the good in people long after everyone else had given up. That was part of her charm, but also her curse. When her marriage began to crack, Jessica didn't tell anyone. She thought the best way to handle a storm was to stay quiet until it passed. The problem was, this storm had no intention of moving on. The silence in that Denver home had started to sound heavier than any argument could. Back in Denver, before the cruise, she woke up every morning before sunrise, packed her kids' lunches, and tried to pretend life was normal. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, the same way it had for years, but the warmth between her and Ethan had faded into routine. Her husband was already slipping out early for meetings that rarely existed. Jessica would text him reminders like, "Don't forget the mortgage payment," or "pick up milk after work," but the replies got shorter over time. "Sure. Busy. Later." One friend recalled Jessica showing her the texts, saying, "It's like talking to a stranger." Money had become the wall between them. Ethan's real estate business had collapsed, leaving debts Jessica didn't know existed until the bank called. Instead of coming clean, he buried the truth under charm and excuses. Jessica found the notices in the mail herself, letters from the IRS, bank warnings, even a refinancing form she never signed. When she confronted him, Ethan brushed her off, saying, "I've got it handled, Jess. You just worry too much." She wanted to believe him, and she did, because believing was easier than facing what she feared most, that their marriage was already over. The people who loved her saw the changes long before she did. Her sister Laura said Jessica had stopped wearing her wedding ring when she wasn't around Ethan, but she still defended him to everyone else. When Laura once asked, "Why do you keep covering for him?" Jessica answered, "Because that's what you do when you love someone. You don't embarrass them, you help them get back up." Her best friend Marisol remembered Jessica crying on her couch after another argument about money. She just kept saying, "He's lost right now, but I can't give up on him. He's the father of my kids." There was no bitterness in her voice, just exhaustion. She still smiled when she spoke about him, but her eyes were glassy, the look of someone trying to convince herself that loyalty was still enough. By May of 2023, Ethan's lies had grown heavier. Jessica discovered he had secretly taken out a large life insurance policy in both their names, listing himself as the only beneficiary. She didn't see it as a warning sign. She thought it was another desperate attempt to protect their family's future. Around that same time, she began writing notes in her phone, messages she never sent. One of them read, "Maybe when this trip is over, I'll finally be free, one way or another." Another simply said, "I miss being happy." The notes showed what her friends already knew. Jessica was hopeful, but she was tired of being the only one fighting. The glow of her phone screen at night became her secret companion, her only outlet for feelings she couldn't say out loud. When Ethan suggested they take a break, Jessica interpreted it as a plea for help. She took money from her savings and booked a 7-day Caribbean cruise for the two of them. She told her sister, "It'll be good for us. Just the ocean, no bills, no stress." Laura didn't argue, but she later admitted she had a bad feeling. "It wasn't the kind of trip you take to heal," she said. "It sounded like the kind you take to say goodbye." Jessica ignored her instincts. She believed in second chances because that's what she'd always wanted someone to believe in for her. On the day they packed, neighbors remembered hearing laughter from the driveway, forced, but there. Ethan loaded the suitcases. Jessica locked the door and looked back at their home like someone memorizing what might never feel the same again. On board, she kept her hope alive with small gestures. She tried dressing up for dinner, booking excursions, even leaving notes in their cabin that said things like, "Still us," and "Remember this?" Passengers who saw them said Jessica was polite, reserved, but always trying. "You could tell she was making an effort," said one woman who shared a table with them one night. She laughed at his jokes even when he wasn't funny, but her eyes looked sad. A bartender recalled Jessica coming alone one afternoon, ordering a club soda and sitting in silence. "I asked if she was waiting for someone," he said. She smiled and said, "Yeah, he'll come around." But he never did. The sound of the ocean against the hull filled the quiet around her, but the silence between them only grew louder. Each day on the ship told a quiet story of disconnection. While Jessica spent her mornings reading near the pool, Ethan wandered to the bar or the casino. When she tried to plan outings, he said he was tired. At dinner, she'd ask how he was feeling, and he'd shrug. One night she asked directly, "Do you still love me?" He looked at her, paused, and said, "You worry too much." She smiled to hide the hurt. Later that night she wrote in her phone, "I keep asking questions I already know the answers to." Out on the balcony, the wind pressed against her hair as she stood alone, staring into darkness that seemed endless. Somewhere below, music from the ship's lounge floated faintly upward, muffled by distance. Still, Jessica kept believing. She video called her children every evening, always upbeat, never letting them see what was really happening. "Daddy and I are having fun," she told them. "We're going to see dolphins tomorrow." After the call, she'd stare out at the waves for long minutes, lost in thought. Another passenger recalled hearing her on the deck around midnight one evening, whispering into her phone, "I just want him to talk to me again." No one knew who she was talking to. When she finally went back inside, she pressed her palms together and took a slow breath, as if convincing herself tomorrow would be better. Friends later described Jessica as forgiving to a fault. She wasn't naive. She understood what was happening. But she convinced herself that if she held on long enough, things would change. She had always been the peacemaker, the caretaker, the believer. In her world, walking away wasn't strength. It was failure. And because of that, she stayed, even when staying hurt. The ship's log later showed she spent an unusual amount of time alone that week. Not withdrawn, but waiting. Always waiting. In one of her final journal notes, Jessica wrote, "I keep trying to remember who I was before I started apologizing for everything." That line, investigators later said, spoke volumes. It revealed a woman living between hope and resignation, trying to keep her marriage alive while quietly mourning it at the same time. On the third night of the cruise, she was seen standing alone on the balcony outside the couple's cabin, staring at the horizon. A crew member passing by asked if she was okay. She turned, smiled faintly, and said, "Just thinking about things." That moment stayed with him, because by the next morning, she was gone. The air that night was still, and the sea below was calm, the kind of calm that hides everything. But before that night, Jessica still believed she could turn things around. On the fourth evening, the couple attended a formal dinner together. Passengers remembered her wearing a blue dress, her hair pinned up. "She looked beautiful," said one of the servers. "She told me it was her favorite color because her kids said it made her look like the ocean." During the meal, Ethan kept checking his phone while Jessica tried to make conversation. She told him, "You can at least look at me when I'm talking to you." Another diner overheard. Ethan's response was simple. "You don't need to make a scene." Jessica didn't reply. She just put her napkin down, excused herself, and left the table. That was the last time anyone saw her truly at peace. In the hallway, camera footage, she walks away slowly, adjusting her bracelet as she turns the corner. The sound of footsteps fades, then disappears. Back in the cabin later that night, she sent one last message to her sister that was never delivered due to poor signal. "I'm trying one last time, pray for me." When her phone was later recovered, that message remained unsent, frozen in the digital quiet of 11:32 p.m. The timestamp matched the hour before the surveillance video captured her and Ethan entering the room together. Investigators said that detail still haunts them. In every story like this, there's a moment when hope turns into something else. Not despair exactly, but denial. Jessica's hope had kept her loyal for too long. She didn't see that sometimes the people we try hardest to save are the ones already letting go. She boarded that cruise thinking love could heal what time had broken. What she didn't realize was that some promises can only hold so much weight before they sink. That ship was supposed to be her fresh start. Instead, it became her silence. She wasn't naive. She was surviving. She believed in marriage, in forgiveness, in fixing what's broken. That's what makes her story so hard to tell, because she did everything people tell you you're supposed to do. She stayed. She forgave. She hoped. But hope has a way of blinding us from the danger standing right beside us. July 13th, 2023, 11:48 p.m. The hallway camera outside cabin 9274 recorded Ethan and Jessica Lawson returning to their room. She walked in first, barefoot, holding her shoes. He followed, glancing down the corridor before closing the door. For a few seconds, the hallway remained empty. Then the cabin feed went black. For 27 minutes after that, there was no movement, no sound, no trace. Later, technicians confirmed it wasn't a glitch. The system had been manually disabled from inside the room. For investigators who reviewed the footage later, that silence felt colder than any scream could. According to Ethan's statement, everything that happened after was an accident. He told investigators Jessica had been drinking heavily and stepped out onto the balcony to take a selfie. "She lost her balance," he said. "She leaned too far over and just slipped." He claimed he rushed to the railing and saw only darkness below. But when the crew examined the balcony, nothing about that story fit. The railing was spotless, no fingerprints, no smudges, not even a partial palm print. "You'd expect at least some trace of her grip," one forensic officer later said. There wasn't a single mark. Outside, the wind was light, the waves calm, too calm for an accident like that to go unnoticed. Around midnight, passengers in nearby cabins started hearing noises. A couple in 9272 told the Coast Guard they'd been awakened by a woman shouting, "Stop!" followed by a loud crash, like furniture hitting the floor. Then came another sound, softer but chilling, a brief cry that cut off mid-sentence. After that, silence again. A man 2 doors down recalled hearing the balcony door slam hard enough to shake the wall. He assumed it was a late-night argument and went back to bed, unaware of what had just happened next door. At 12:03 a.m., the cabin camera came back online. Ethan was pacing the room in a clean t-shirt and jeans. Investigators later noticed his clothes were dry, unusual, considering he said he leaned over the balcony trying to spot Jessica in the water. He wasn't out of breath. He wasn't panicking. He was calm, unnervingly calm. At 12:09 a.m., he picked up the cabin phone and called guest services. The employee on duty, a 26-year-old named Mark Rivera, testified later. He said his wife fell overboard. Just like that. No panic, no yelling. He sounded like someone confirming a delay on a flight. When Rivera asked when it happened, Ethan said, "A few minutes ago. It's done. She's gone." Rivera asked if he wanted security or medical assistance, but Ethan replied, "There's no point. The sea's too deep here." Rivera later said that when he hung up, the line was quiet except for the hum of the air vent. The kind of silence that makes you realize something's deeply wrong. By protocol, the bridge should have triggered an Oscar alert, a man overboard broadcast, the moment Ethan made that call, but no such alert was logged until 12:54 a.m., nearly 45 minutes later. In that gap, Ethan showered, changed clothes, and made a second call, this time to the captain. When the captain entered, Ethan was sitting on the bed staring toward the balcony. He repeated the same words. "She leaned too far." The captain later described him as polite, measured, and detached. He just said, "You won't find her. The currents will take her by now." The Coast Guard's later reconstruction suggested that if Jessica had truly fallen when he said, her body would have stayed within a 5-mile radius for at least 2 hours before drifting. But no one searched that area until daylight, and by dawn, the ship was already bound for Miami. When the ship's security began examining the cabin, they found several inconsistencies. The balcony door hinge was fractured inward, not loose, but bent as though something or someone had struck it from inside. A half-empty glass of wine sat beside a phone charger still plugged into the wall. Jessica's sandals were by the bed, her hair clipped on the dresser. Her phone was missing. When asked, Ethan said she must have taken it to the balcony. But the last photo on her camera roll was from dinner hours earlier, a forced smile under soft restaurant lighting. By morning, rumors spread through the ship. Passengers whispered over breakfast, asking whether it was true that someone had gone overboard. The captain's announcement at 8:12 a.m. confirmed only that a guest emergency had occurred. A woman named Rachel Owens, who'd chatted with Jessica earlier in the trip, later told investigators, "She didn't sound like someone ready to disappear. She talked about her kids and how she was finally feeling hopeful again. People like that don't just lean too far." Security footage later revealed Ethan leaving his cabin around 12:45 a.m., carrying a small duffel bag and a white towel. He dropped the bag down the housekeeping chute and returned 3 minutes later. When questioned, he said it contained his wife's belongings. Things she won't need anymore. Investigators found that statement deeply unsettling. The bag was never recovered. When divers later searched the waters near the ship's position, they discovered fragments of Jessica's blouse tangled in coral roughly 4 miles from the vessel's route. The tearing pattern didn't match a clean fall. It looked like she'd been grabbed or caught before she hit the water, a dive team member said. Even then, the incident was still listed as an accident at sea. Ethan was placed under observation in the medical bay and given a sedative. He told staff he didn't want to speak until they docked. During his first interview in Miami, Ethan repeated the same story. She was drunk. She wanted a picture. She leaned too far. It all happened so fast. He never referred to her in the past tense and never asked about recovery efforts. When the lead investigator, Detective Angela Ramos, asked if he wanted to join the search, he said, "You'll never find her. The sea keeps its own." Ramos later said, "It wasn't shock I saw in his eyes. It was certainty." When Jessica's family received the call, her sister Laura tried phoning Ethan immediately. He didn't answer. Hours later, she texted him, "What happened? Please tell me she's okay." His reply came the next morning. "It was an accident. She fell." That was all he said. The Coast Guard report found more contradictions. Weather conditions were stable, no high winds, clear skies. Visibility exceeded 8 miles. No deck moisture was reported, meaning the balcony surface wasn't slippery. If she had fallen, someone would have heard the impact. No one did. but multiple passengers remembered hearing an argument, a struggle, a cry, and then silence. Investigators began to suspect that what happened on that balcony wasn't a fall. It was a confrontation. The ship's doctor examined Ethan shortly after the event and noted minor scratches on his wrist and a faint mark near his neck. Ethan claimed they came from leaning over the railing, but the doctor's report described the abrasions as linear and shallow, consistent with human fingernails. When crew members were questioned, a housekeeper recalled an odd exchange earlier that evening. Around 8 p.m., she had knocked to deliver towels. Ethan opened the door. Jessica appeared behind him and said softly, "It's fine. I'll take them." The housekeeper said Jessica's tone was polite but uneasy, and Ethan's hand stayed on the door, blocking it from opening further. She didn't think much of it then, until later. By the time the ship reached Miami, the FBI's maritime unit had joined the Coast Guard on board. Deck 9 was sealed off, and passengers were instructed to remain in their cabins. When investigators sprayed luminol across the floor of 9274, faint traces of blood appeared near the balcony door. Too faint to be seen by eye, but enough to tell a story no one wanted to believe. Through it all, Ethan remained disturbingly calm. He gave statements, nodded politely, and said the same line each time. She leaned too far. When the captain asked one final question, "Are you sure that's what happened?" Ethan paused for the first time and said, "You wouldn't understand." Whatever happened inside cabin 9274 that night, the ocean became the only witness. When crew members arrived, Ethan was calm. Too calm. And what he told the captain next made no sense at all. If you've made it this far, type, "I'm still here" in the comments. Because from this point on, the calm is over, and everything you thought you knew about this story is about to change. July 16th, 2023, Port of Miami. The Ocean Star cruise ship drifted slowly toward the dock under perfect skies, but the tension on board was unbearable. Flashbulbs popped, cameras clicked, and reporters shouted questions from behind the security barricades. "Mr. Lawson, any update on your wife? Did she fall, or was she pushed?" Ethan Lawson, wearing a clean white shirt and dark glasses, walked past them without breaking stride. His expression was measured. No tears, no trembling hands. To the cameras, he was a grieving husband, trying to stay composed. To investigators watching from the sidelines, he looked like a man who had already accepted the outcome. The Miami Coast Guard boarded first, followed by the FBI's Maritime Division. Under Title 18, Section 7 of federal law, any suspicious death or disappearance at sea falls under U.S. jurisdiction the moment a ship docks. Special Agent Angela Ramos and forensic analyst Derek Whitman were assigned to lead the investigation. Ramos had seen hundreds of tragedies at sea, but rarely one that felt so controlled. "He didn't act like someone waiting for answers," she later said. "He acted like someone who already knew them." Inside cabin 9274, the air smelled faintly of bleach. Technicians in gloves moved quietly, photographing every inch. The balcony door's hinge was visibly bent inward, a sign of force from inside the room. Under the bathroom sink, a reddish smear clung to the porcelain edge. Luminol spray made it glow blue under ultraviolet light. Blood. "You don't clean like this after an accident," Whitman muttered. "You clean like you're hiding something." The forensic sweep took hours. Jessica's belongings were still neatly arranged. Sandals by the bed, earrings on the nightstand, a folded dress that looked ready for another day she'd never see. Her phone, however, was gone. When questioned later, Ethan said, "She must have taken it outside to take pictures." But when techs examined the ship's Wi-Fi logs, they found her last phone activity was at 11:49 p.m., the same minute the cabin camera went dark. The note she left unsent read, "He said I should stop asking questions." That message would soon mean everything. As the FBI collected evidence on board, Ethan stood outside the port terminal, giving short statements to the press. "She leaned too far," he repeated. "It was dark. I couldn't save her." His voice stayed steady, and the cameras captured the right amount of sorrow for a soundbite. A woman from a local news station later said, "It was like he'd practiced it in the mirror." Behind him, Passengers whispered to one another, stunned by his composure. Inside the ship, Ramos reviewed new footage from 12:45 a.m. It showed Ethan leaving the cabin, a white bathrobe draped over one arm, a small duffel bag in his hand. He turned down a restricted hallway and dropped the bag into a service chute. When investigators asked about it, he claimed it was laundry, her stuff. The laundry room, however, was closed after midnight, and no staff recalled seeing him there. On July 17, 9:42 a.m., FBI analysts began reconstructing Ethan's financial profile. Within hours, they found something that reframed the entire case: a $1.2 million life insurance policy in Jessica's name, taken out just 2 months earlier. The beneficiary, Ethan Lawson. The agent who filed the paperwork in Denver remembered him well. He was confident, she said it was just a formality for travel safety, told me his wife didn't need to know. The date of approval was May 5th, less than 2 weeks before Jessica used her own savings to book their Caribbean trip. Ramos examined Ethan's financial statements and felt her stomach tighten. He'd been drowning in debt, unpaid property taxes, 2 foreclosures, multiple credit lines maxed out. His real estate business had collapsed the year before, leaving him with hundreds of thousands in losses. Jessica's death, Whitman said, reading the numbers aloud, erases every problem he has. Ramos stared at the spreadsheet and replied, "Then maybe that was the plan all along." Back inside the cabin, lab results came back confirming that the blood found under the sink was Jessica's. Her blouse fibers were stuck in the doorframe at shoulder height. The impact pattern on the balcony matched a struggle, not a slip. If this was an accident, Ramos told her team, it had a funny way of looking like a crime. When Ethan was confronted with the results, he didn't blink. If there was blood, maybe she cut herself shaving, he said. Jessica didn't have a razor in that bathroom, Ramos replied. We checked. Then came the digital twist that unraveled everything. Investigators examined Ethan's ship-issued phone. It had been reset at 12:51 a.m., right after his second call to the captain. The FBI's cyber forensics team at Quantico restored fragments of deleted data. Among them was a single outgoing text message sent at 12:42 a.m. to an unregistered Florida number. It read, "It's done. She's gone. I'll text when I'm back." The number was traced to a prepaid phone belonging to Samantha Price, a 29-year-old travel consultant from Fort Lauderdale. When questioned, Samantha admitted she and Ethan had been seeing each other for nearly a year. "He told me the marriage was over, that he was just waiting for the right time," she said. Agents showed her screenshots of the deleted message. Samantha froze. "He told me she fell," she whispered. "I didn't think he meant like that." In later interviews, she revealed more. Ethan had promised they'd start over together once he handled things. Investigators retrieved dozens of messages between them. One reading, "When this is all over, we'll finally be free." Another, sent the morning before the cruise, said, "Be patient. It's almost time." Ethan's bank records added another layer. A $9,500 wire transfer had been sent from his account to a prepaid debit card registered under Samantha's name on the day before the trip. The memo line simply read, "In case." That same morning, he withdrew another $3,000 in cash and purchased a second phone using a false name, the same one that later received the incriminating message. The pattern was no longer circumstantial. It was intent. By July 20th, the FBI had built a comprehensive picture of a man who thought he'd engineered the perfect cover story. Forensic results, digital traces, financial motives, all pointed in one direction. Still, what shocked investigators most wasn't the evidence. It was Ethan's composure. During his second interrogation, Ramos asked, "Why didn't you search for her?" Ethan leaned back, crossed his arms, and said, "There was no point. The sea takes what it wants." When Ramos pressed him about the policy, he smiled faintly. "That money doesn't matter now," he said. "She's gone." Whitman, standing in the corner, whispered later, "He wasn't defending himself. He was performing." In her field report, Ramos described Ethan as a man who viewed tragedy as transaction. But even with everything they had, something still felt missing. The team reanalyzed all recovered files from the ship's data cache. Backups automatically synced to the ship's internal server. It was there, buried in an encrypted folder, that analysts found a single unsent message Ethan had deleted minutes after the camera feed went dark. The timestamp, 12:42 a.m., and then investigators found a deleted text message Ethan sent just 20 minutes after the cameras went dark. July 21st, 2023, Miami. Inside the FBI's digital forensics lab, the only sound was the hum of cold servers. Agents leaned over glowing monitors as lines of recovered code scrolled across the screen. Then, one message appeared. Short, deliberate, irreversible. It's done. She's gone. I'll text when I'm back. The room went still. The timestamp read 12:42 a.m., just 19 minutes after the ship's cabin camera went dark. The number it was sent to traced back to a Florida contact listed as Alyssa Grant, 31 years old, a real estate agent from Fort Lauderdale. Her name was written in red on the board beside Ethan's photo. Everyone in that room knew. This case had just changed direction. Investigators dug deeper and found months of hidden communication between Ethan and Alyssa. Their messages weren't casual. They were coded, planned, and full of empty promises. The first text in the thread dated back to November 2022, from a real estate networking event in downtown Miami. One message from Ethan read, "Finally met someone who gets me." A month later, his tone changed. "You're my future, Alyssa. I just have to take care of a few things first." When questioned later, Alyssa said, "He told me his marriage was over. He said the divorce was just waiting for paperwork." She admitted she never met Jessica, never even saw a photo of her. She thought Ethan was rebuilding his life, not erasing one. The FBI subpoenaed Ethan's email accounts. In one draft folder, they found a message titled "New Beginnings." It had never been sent, but its contents were damning. "After the trip, I'll make it official. No baggage, no drama, no looking back." The date was July 10th, 3 days before the cruise. Alyssa told agents that Ethan promised her a new start in Mexico. "He said we'd move there after he handled some financial stuff," she said during her interview. Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. She just kept repeating, "He said he was fixing things. I thought he meant his debts." Agents recovered security footage from June 29th showing Ethan and Alyssa meeting at a cafe in Fort Lauderdale. He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside, investigators later confirmed, was an $8,500 withdrawal receipt from a joint account Ethan shared with Jessica. Alyssa said, "He told me it was money for a business investment. I didn't ask questions." She looked down during questioning, whispering, "I wish I had." Ramos, the lead investigator, later said, her reaction wasn't guilt, it was realization, that she was part of something she didn't understand. Emails between the two revealed a carefully planned future. On June 18th, Alyssa wrote, "Are we still going to Mexico after your trip?" Ethan replied, "Yes, I'll be done by then. Just keep it quiet." The simplicity of the words chilled everyone who read them. It wasn't the tone of a man trying to save his marriage. It was the tone of a man closing a deal. When investigators compared Ethan's financials to the messages, the motive came into sharp focus. He was drowning, 2 foreclosures, an IRS lien, and 3 maxed-out credit lines. His real estate business had collapsed the year before, leaving him desperate and paranoid. Jessica, unaware of how deep the hole had become, had been quietly using her savings to keep the household afloat. In May, Ethan secretly took out a $1.2 million life insurance policy in her name. The beneficiary was him, and the policy matured exactly 1 week after the cruise. Ramos reviewed the documents with her partner, Special Agent Derek Whitman. "He didn't just plan this," she said. "He rehearsed it." Whitman nodded. "You can tell from the precision. Every move had a purpose, every message, every lie." They interviewed Ethan again at the Miami field office. Ramos placed a printed copy of the recovered text message on the table and asked, "What does this mean?" "It's done. She's gone. I'll text when I'm back." Ethan leaned back, expression blank, People say things they don't mean, he replied. It's just a message. Ramos looked him in the eye and said, except this one matches the moment your wife disappeared. When they mentioned Alyssa's name, Ethan's composure cracked for the first time. His hands tightened slightly around the chair's edge. You think she had something to do with this? He asked. Ramos replied calmly, No, Ethan, we think you did. For the first time since his arrest, silence filled the room. Meanwhile, in Fort Lauderdale, Alyssa sat with her attorney, stunned by what she was learning. He told me she fell, she said quietly. I thought it was an accident. I didn't know he meant he pushed her. She agreed to cooperate fully, turning over her phone and emails. Those records showed a $9,500 transfer from Ethan's account, labeled, For You, in case. It matched the cash withdrawal made the day before the cruise. To investigators, that phrase, in case, said everything. The following morning, Ramos and Whitman met with the Financial Crimes Division to review Ethan's debt structure. One ledger note caught their attention. Loan repayment due July 15th, $60,000. The lender, a Denver contractor named Rick Delaney, confirmed Ethan promised a major payout after his trip. He said he'd be square by mid-July, Delaney told them. Sounded confident. Too confident. When Ramos heard that, she turned to Whitman and said, he wasn't planning to earn it. He was planning to collect it. Forensic analysts reconstructed Ethan's deleted travel plans. A one-way ticket from Miami to Cancun was booked under the name Daniel Rains, departing 4 days after the cruise. A second reservation listed Alyssa Grant on the same flight, same hotel, same check-in date. She never knew. When shown the itinerary, she covered her mouth and whispered, He said it was for a future work trip. Her voice broke as she added, He never said whose future he was planning for. By July 22nd, the digital case file told a complete story, one of lies layered over love and greed disguised as romance. Ramos summarized it in her report. He treated marriage like an investment, love like leverage, and loss like profit. Ethan had engineered everything: the cruise, the argument narrative, the false grief, even the public interviews. To the outside world, he was a husband in mourning. To investigators, he was a man who believed the sea would erase his crime. But oceans don't erase digital trails. They don't hide the numbers on a bank statement or the metadata on a message sent at 12:42 a.m. When analysts examined the text linguistically, they noted something chilling. The phrasing wasn't that of someone reacting in shock. It read like confirmation: short, clean, final. One specialist said he wasn't reporting an event, he was closing a transaction. Ethan Lawson believed he had crafted the perfect plan, a vanishing act disguised as tragedy. But the truth had already anchored itself in data, and data doesn't forget. He left traces in every account, every email, every careless word. And with each recovered message, a picture emerged, not of love gone wrong, but of greed masquerading as devotion. But detectives didn't just find a mistress. They found motive written in his own debt. If you're still watching, make sure you're subscribed and share this story with someone close to you. Because sometimes, the people who say they love you most aren't promising forever. They're planning their escape. July 25th, 2023, Denver. In a windowless office filled with folders, laptops, and bank statements, investigators spread out Ethan Lawson's financial history across a long table. The air conditioner hummed faintly, but the tension in that room felt heavier than the paper stacked before them. Every page revealed another layer of debt, another desperate decision disguised as strategy. There were casino losses, unpaid investors, foreclosure notices, and unanswered IRS letters. The pattern was clear. Ethan wasn't unlucky. He was reckless, gambling with both money and trust until there was nothing left to wager but his wife's life. One by one, analysts traced his downfall. Lawson Group Holdings, his real estate venture, had folded months before the cruise. He owed over $280,000 to private lenders and was weeks from losing the family home. The final foreclosure notice came on May 22nd, The same day, he searched online for life insurance accidental death policy C. A former associate told investigators, "He looked calm, but you could see the fear." He said, "There's always a way to start over. You just have to be smart about it." That quote would later become one of the most haunting pieces of testimony in the trial. Forensic accountant Marissa Holt laid it out bluntly. He had no assets, just debt, anger, and a policy that could fix it all. Ethan had applied for multiple life insurance plans on Jessica, but only one was approved, a $1.2 million policy through a Denver brokerage. The agent who handled the file confirmed Jessica's signature was digitally attached, but never verified in person. She didn't even know the renewal went through, Holt said. He made sure of that. Investigators found several payments Ethan made to the brokerage using his wife's joint account without her knowledge, covering just enough to keep the policy active until July. Jessica, quietly preparing to leave, had already begun protecting herself financially. On June 19th, she moved $32,000 into a personal savings account. Her sister told detectives she said she didn't trust him anymore. She was just waiting until after the cruise to make it official. The same day, Ethan withdrew $9,500 in cash and wired it to a prepaid card later linked to Alyssa Grant. Every financial move mirrored his growing panic. He was burning both ends of the rope, Holt explained, and the only escape plan left was a dead spouse with a payout. Investigators also unearthed months of gambling records. Ethan had been placing sports bets online and wiring cash to offshore accounts. One casino log from June 30th showed him losing over $12,000 in a single night. On July 2nd, he wrote in an email to a friend, "Big changes ahead. Might finally get out of this mess." That friend told investigators he sounded sure of himself, like something was already decided. Those words took on chilling meaning once the timeline was matched. Jessica, meanwhile, had confided in a coworker just days before the cruise. She said she was tired, the coworker recalled. Not sad, just tired. She said, "I'm going to give this trip one last try. If it doesn't work, I'm done." Her phone later revealed a note written that same week. After this, freedom, one way or another. For investigators, that line captured everything. Hope mixed with resignation. Love tangled with survival. When FBI agents mapped Ethan's transactions, the motive formed like clockwork. His credit cards were maxed. 2 personal loans were in default. And the Denver brokerage confirmed the insurance payout clause included accidental death at sea, double indemnity. Ramos, the lead investigator, turned to her partner during briefing and said, "He didn't pick a cruise for romance. He picked it because the ocean doesn't give evidence back." Experts from the National Maritime Crime Unit later testified that maritime accident homicides often share the same red flags: financial stress, prearranged policies, and sudden displays of affection leading up to the trip. Dr. Karen Lutz, a behavioral criminologist, told investigators, "These men don't see murder as evil. They see it as balance. Debt erased, life reset." Ethan fit that description exactly. By July 24th, the money trail was undeniable. Investigators found one last email from Ethan to his insurance agent, dated July 9th, just days before the cruise. It read, "Just confirming payout timeline in case of travel incident. I'll be unreachable for a few days." The subject line, "Peace of mind." When Ramos read it aloud in the briefing room, the silence was suffocating. Whitman, her partner, finally said, "He didn't plan a vacation. He planned a liquidation." When the case reached prosecutors, one of them described Ethan as a man who saw murder as a financial strategy. But as the evidence would soon show, that was only part of the story. There was still one piece left, a hidden connection buried within his debt that no one saw coming. September 2nd, 2023, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was a humid morning when U.S. Marshals arrived at a quiet townhouse just outside Coral Ridge. Inside, Ethan Lawson sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone when the knock came. By then, the investigation had moved far beyond suspicion. The text message, the insurance policy, and the financial records had all tied together. He was calm as they handcuffed him, almost detached, asking only one question: "Did you find her body?" When agents later recounted that moment, one of them said, "He wasn't scared. He looked relieved, like the performance was finally over." During interrogation, Ethan told investigators that Jessica had been depressed and talked about ending it. His voice was steady as he said, "She told me she couldn't keep pretending. She leaned over the balcony and she was gone. I tried to reach her, but there was nothing I could do." His attorney, David Grayson, later repeated those words to the press, calling it a tragic misunderstanding. But detectives had already reviewed too much evidence for that story to hold. Still, when he appeared in court 6 weeks later, he looked every bit the grieving husband. Somber suit, red eyes, holding a photo of Jessica. "He was playing to the room," prosecutor Elaine Kershaw said later. "Every sigh, every pause, it was calculated." The defense leaned into emotional manipulation, painting Ethan as a broken man who'd been overwhelmed by failure and abandonment. They claimed Jessica had become distant, cold, and emotionally unavailable. "She was the strong one," the defense told the jury. "He felt small beside her success." In their opening statement, Grayson said, "This isn't the story of a killer. This is the story of a man whose marriage collapsed, who watched the woman he loved slip away, literally and emotionally." But prosecutors saw through the act. They had Jessica's journals, her text messages, and her plans to leave. They knew his tears were rehearsed. Psychologists brought in by the prosecution described Ethan as narcissistic and emotionally parasitic. Dr. Karen Lutz, the same behavioral expert who'd analyzed the financial motive, testified that his behavior matched classic control patterns: possessive affection, blame shifting, and emotional gaslighting. She explained how men like Ethan often rewrite reality to protect their self-image. They convince themselves the victim chose the outcome. It preserves the illusion of power. In one exchange during cross-examination, the prosecutor asked, "So you're saying he believed his own lie?" Lutz replied, "Exactly. To him, it stopped being murder. It became justification." The most haunting moment came when prosecutors read one of Jessica's final journal entries aloud in court. The pages were water-stained, recovered from a box her sister had found in the attic. The handwriting was careful, almost hesitant. It read, "I think he blames me for his failures. I can't fix what's already gone." There was a pause in the courtroom. No sound, no movement. Jurors later said that was the moment their sympathy shifted. Ethan's face didn't change. He just looked down, expression blank. One juror said, "He didn't even flinch. That told me everything." Throughout the trial, Ethan maintained the same narrative: that Jessica had jumped, that she was struggling with anxiety and guilt over their finances. The defense introduced screenshots of text messages she had sent to friends saying she felt trapped. But prosecutors countered with context. Messages sent on the same days showing Jessica looking for apartments and applying for new jobs. "That's not despair," Kershaw argued. "That's a woman planning a future." As testimony continued, the illusion of Ethan's grief started to crumble. One witness, a crew member from the ship, testified that Ethan had been oddly calm after reporting Jessica missing. He kept saying, "The sea takes what it wants." Another passenger recalled seeing him at breakfast the next morning, reading a newspaper as if nothing had happened. "He wasn't crying," the witness said. "He was eating pancakes." Those details, small but human, painted a picture that no defense strategy could undo. Forensic psychologists explained that Ethan's personality fit the mold of narcissistic entitlement, the belief that his comfort justified any act. Dr. Lutz told jurors, "He didn't kill her out of hatred. He killed her because she represented failure he couldn't accept." That line became the centerpiece of the prosecution's argument. They replayed it in closing statements, contrasting it against Jessica's own words from her journal. By the second week, the jury's body language had changed. Arms crossed, eyes cold, no longer leaning toward the defense table. The sympathy Ethan had carefully built was gone. Even the judge noted the shift, pausing when the defense objected to another emotional exhibit. "You may proceed," he said quietly. "The truth speaks for itself." On the final day of testimony, prosecutors brought in the forensic ocean analysts who'd reconstructed the trajectory of Jessica's fall. Using the ship's measurements, railing height, and wind resistance data, they demonstrated that the angle of descent was inconsistent with a voluntary jump. "At that distance and that speed," the lead analyst said, "a fall requires external force. She was pushed." Gasps filled the courtroom. Ethan's eyes shifted for the first time. As the jurors absorbed that final piece of evidence, the room fell into absolute silence. The sound of the air vents filled the space like white noise. The prosecutor glanced at the jury and said, "He told the world she jumped. The science says otherwise." And then, the judge called for recess. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as people began to file out, whispering in disbelief. The story that had started as a tale of love and tragedy had now become something far more deliberate, a blueprint for manipulation and control. And when they returned after recess, what came next would change everything. Thank you for being part of this story. If you've been following since the beginning, your support means everything. Join our community to unlock exclusive behind-the-scenes insights and help us keep telling stories that remind the world how truth always finds its way to the surface. October 16th, 2023, Miami-Dade County Courthouse. The courtroom was filled to capacity. Reporters lined the back wall while family members sat motionless in the first row. For months, the case had gripped the public, but now the moment of reckoning had arrived. Ethan Lawson, wearing a navy suit and expressionless stare, sat at the defense table as prosecutors began reconstructing the final hours of the cruise. Every word echoed through the courtroom like a slow, unraveling confession. The camera blackout, the missing duffel bag, and the deleted message that shattered his story. Prosecutor Elaine Kershaw stood before the jury and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this was never an accident. This was engineering. A man who built an illusion to hide intent." The prosecution began with the ship's technical logs. Forensic technician Mark Delgado explained how the cabin feed was manually disabled from the inside at exactly 12:19 a.m. and came back online 27 minutes later. "That wasn't a glitch," he told the court. "It was deliberate." Security footage showed Ethan leaving his cabin at 12:45 a.m. with a small duffel bag and returning 12 minutes later, empty-handed. The ship's motion data placed them near open water, with no witnesses nearby. Delgado turned to the jury and said, "This wasn't chaos. It was control." He knew exactly when the cameras would fail and how long it would take before anyone noticed. Then came the digital evidence. FBI analyst Rachel Kim testified about the recovered text. "It's done. She's gone. I'll text when I'm back." Her voice was steady as she pointed to the screen projection of the message timestamp, 12:42 a.m., the same window as the blackout. The jurors stared silently as Kim read Ethan's second unsent message, one that investigators had retrieved through forensic recovery. "No one will ever know." When asked what that indicated, she replied, that he understood exactly what he'd done. Ethan sat still, jaw tight, his eyes fixed forward. He whispered something to his attorney, but it was too soft to hear. The defense began their counterattack by reframing the story. Attorney David Grayson called it a marital tragedy blown into spectacle. He told jurors, "This is not the story of a killer. This is the story of two people lost in pain, a husband trying to stop his wife from falling apart, and a tragedy that no one could have predicted." The defense painted Jessica as emotionally fragile, highlighting her journal entries about exhaustion and uncertainty. But the prosecution was ready. Kershaw stood and read Jessica's note in full context. "I think he blames me for his failures. I can't fix what's already gone." Her voice carried across the room. "She wasn't unstable," Kershaw said. "She was done being manipulated." The turning point came when prosecutors introduced Alyssa Grant. She walked to the witness stand wearing a simple black dress, visibly nervous but composed. Her presence alone drew murmurs through the room. Under oath, she confirmed what investigators already suspected. Ethan had planned the entire thing. "He told me before the cruise," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He said Jessica wasn't coming back. I didn't understand what he meant then. I do now." The courtroom fell silent. Even Ethan's attorney paused, glancing briefly at his client before continuing cross-examination. Grayson tried to paint Alyssa as a jealous lover seeking revenge, asking, "Isn't it true that you felt betrayed when you learned he was still married?" She nodded. "Yes," she said, "but betrayal doesn't make murder appear out of thin air. He said those words to me. I'll never forget them." Forensic accountants took the stand next, outlining Ethan's financial motive: the life insurance policy, the unpaid loans, the mortgage foreclosure. One expert testified that Ethan's total debt exceeded $400,000. "He saw her death as a financial reset," Kershaw argued. "He didn't lose control. He executed a plan." The prosecution ended by displaying the final sequence from the cruise's security timeline. On screen, the audience saw Ethan and Jessica entering their cabin at 11:48 p.m. Hours later, only Ethan would reappear. At 12:19, the feed dies, Kershaw narrated. At 12:42, he sends the message. At 12:45, he walks away. And at 6:42 the next morning, he reports her missing. That's not confusion. That's choreography. As the closing arguments concluded, the judge's gavel struck, signaling recess. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters rushed to file updates, and Jessica's mother quietly wiped her eyes. "He looked right at me," she told one journalist, "and I didn't see remorse, just emptiness." When court reconvened, the jury had made their decision. 12 people who had listened for weeks now sat frozen, eyes fixed on the foreperson. The clerk asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The answer came steady and clear. "We have." The foreperson stood, holding a sheet of paper that carried the weight of 2 lives. On count 1, first-degree murder, guilty. On count 2, wire fraud, guilty. The judge turned toward Ethan, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Lawson," he said slowly, "you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." Ethan didn't flinch. He simply nodded once, as though the outcome had been decided long before the words were spoken. Behind him, Alyssa lowered her head. The silence that followed lasted almost half a minute before the judge's gavel struck again. Reporters described that moment as surreal. No shouting, no tears, just quiet realization. The prosecutor later said, "It was the first time he couldn't control the narrative." In a post-trial interview, one juror said, "When we saw the video timeline, we stopped debating. He'd written his own confession in data." Another juror added, "He didn't even look sorry. He looked finished." As the courtroom emptied, Jessica's family remained seated. Her sister clutched the same photo Jessica had used for her passport, smiling, hopeful, unaware of the plan being written around her. The judge's words echoed in their minds: life without parole. Justice had been served, but closure remained distant. And yet, as the final gavel fell and cameras faded, one question lingered. What really happened in those last minutes between husband and wife, in that silent cabin where no camera, no witness, and no sea current could tell the full truth? August 2024. Nearly a year after the verdict, the waves of the Caribbean looked no different than they did the night Jessica Lawson vanished. But beneath that familiar horizon, the ripples of her case had changed everything about how investigators approached deaths at sea. The cruise line that once called her death an accident now faced public outrage and federal reform. Maritime authorities announced that all new ships departing U.S. ports would require balcony pressure sensors, secondary surveillance systems, and real-time emergency alerts that bypass manual shutdown. The amendment became known informally as the Lawson Clause, named after the woman whose fall forced an entire industry to confront its blind spots. Her parents attended the signing of the regulation, standing quietly, beside the officials who once ignored their calls. When reporters asked how they felt, her mother said, "I'd rather have my daughter than any law, but maybe now someone else's daughter will come home." In Denver, the Lawson case had become a reference point for journalists and legal analysts. True crime podcasts dissected every second of the footage. Late-night commentators debated how a man could smile through a murder. The Miami Herald ran a feature titled "Murder at Sea When Love Turns Lethal," while CNN released a short documentary revisiting the investigation timeline. In one interview, lead prosecutor Elaine Kershaw reflected, "People assume killers are monsters, but most of the time, they're familiar. They sit across from you at dinner, they hold your hand, and you don't see it until it's too late." Her words echoed what friends had always said about Jessica, that she was loyal to a fault, always believing love could fix what was broken. A close friend named Dana told a journalist, "Jessica wasn't naive. She just wanted to believe the best in someone who didn't deserve it." Out of her family's grief, something enduring emerged. Jessica's parents launched the Lawson Foundation for Justice at Sea, an organization that supports families of missing cruise passengers. The foundation funded private searches, provided legal counsel, and pushed for digital transparency between cruise lines and law enforcement. Within months, 3 more cold maritime cases were reopened using techniques pioneered by the FBI team that investigated Jessica's disappearance. Agent Marissa Holt said during a press conference, "The sea used to hide too many stories. Not anymore." For Jessica's mother, that was the closest thing to peace she would ever find. She kept her daughter's journal by her bedside, reading one line every night, the one that simply said, "Maybe after this trip, I'll finally be free." Still, one question haunted everyone who followed the case. Why had it taken so long to see the signs? The neighbors who once admired the Lawsons as the perfect couple now admitted they'd noticed small things. The tension in Jessica's voice, the nervous smiles at social events, the way Ethan often spoke over her. "It was like watching someone shrink in plain sight," one neighbor said. "You just don't think it's leading to something like that." Domestic psychologists used the case to raise awareness about hidden financial abuse, manipulation, and coercive control. One of them, Dr. Lutz, explained on national television, "Sometimes love keeps you safe. Sometimes it keeps you blind. And by the time you see clearly, it's already too late." Nearly a year after the sentencing, a network documentary aired the final footage of Jessica walking back to her cabin. Timestamp 11:48 p.m. The same moment her life stopped and her name became a law. If investigators hadn't recovered that deleted message, would anyone have ever known what really happened that night? How many more stories have been lost between the waves, written, erased, and swallowed by silence? If you ever find yourself in love that hurts, don't wait for silence to tell your story. Speak before it's too late. Because sometimes the truth doesn't surface on its own. Someone has to bring it up from the deep. Thank you for being part of this journey. Your support helps us continue telling stories that matter. Stories of truth, justice, and the people who refuse to be forgotten. If you believe in what we do, remember to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us, what do you think really happened that night?